The St. Regis Hotel stood as a monumental achievement, the crown jewel of John Jacob Astor IV's ambition. A testament to his vision of unrivaled luxury, it was to be the world's most technologically advanced hotel, offering a lavish retreat for the elite. But within a few short years of its grand opening, the very man who built it would be lost at sea, aboard the Titanic, leaving his dream to unravel without him. The St. Regis, once a symbol of endless possibility, now stands as a silent memorial to a legacy interrupted, a testament to both the fragility of human ambition and the weight of history. Can a legacy survive when its creator is gone? Chapter 1: The Dream That Demanded Everything. The dream of the St. Regis wasn't just about luxury, it was about defining an era. John Jacob Astor IV stood at the window of his study in the spring of 1904, gazing down at Fifth Avenue below. He was 40 years old, the richest man in America, perhaps the richest man in the world. His fortune, inherited and multiplied, exceeded $150 million. In today's money, that would be nearly $5 billion. But wealth alone had never been enough for Astor. It was what wealth could create that obsessed him. Below him, horse-drawn carriages clattered past brownstones, and early motor cars sputtered along cobblestones. The city was changing. New York was shedding its provincial skin and reaching towards something grander. Next, steel towers were rising. Electric lights were replacing gas lamps. The 20th century was arriving, and Astor wanted to build its symbol. He had already built the Astoria Hotel. It stood just down the block from his cousin's Waldorf Hotel, and together they formed the massive Waldorf Astoria, the largest hotel in the world. But that project had been compromised by family rivalry and shared vision. Astor wanted something entirely his own. Each room would have its own telephone. Every room would have its own telephone. Every bathroom would have hot and cold running water. Central air circulation would replace stale hotel corridors. Electric lights would banish shadows from every corner. These innovations existed elsewhere in fragments, but never all together. I never executed with such precision and scale. Astor was an inventor himself. He held patents for bicycle brakes, turbine engines, and pneumatic road improvement devices. His mind worked in blueprints and mechanisms. He understood that true luxury was not about gilding and velvet alone. It was about invisible systems working in perfect harmony. A guest should experience comfort without ever seeing the machinery that produced it. But there was something else driving him, something harder to name. He had been married to Ava Willing since 1891. They had 2 children, Vincent and Alice. The marriage was proper, socially advantageous, and increasingly hollow. Ava occupied one world, Astor another. She hosted society functions. He retreated to his laboratory. The distance between them grew wider each year, measured not in feet, but in fundamental incompatibility. The St. Regis became his refuge before it was even built. While other men might have affairs or taken to drink, Astor poured himself into architectural drawings and engineering specifications. The hotel would be 18 stories tall, the maximum height allowed by New York City building codes. It would occupy the full block front on East 55th Street. It would cost $2,500,000 to construct. Every dollar would come from his personal fortune. His architect was John Pierce. Together, they spent countless hours refining every detail. The entrance would be intimate rather than grand, creating the feeling of entering a private home rather than a commercial establishment. The lobby would feature Caen stone imported from France and marble columns from Italy. The dining room would seat 400 guests beneath a ceiling adorned with murals depicting the four seasons. But it was the invisible innovations that truly mattered to Astor. He insisted on a central vacuum cleaning system with outlets in every room. Servants could clean without carrying equipment. He demanded that every guest room have its own thermostat, allowing individual temperature control. He specified that the kitchen be equipped with electric refrigeration rather than ice boxes. He wanted a telephone switchboard sophisticated enough to connect any room to any other room, or to the outside world at a moment's notice. These were not flourishes, that these were statements. The St. Regis would prove that human ingenuity could conquer every inconvenience, that money and vision, properly applied, could create a world without discomfort. Construction began in 1904. Astor visited the site daily. He wore tailored suits even when inspecting muddy foundations. He carried architectural drawings in a leather portfolio and questioned every decision. The workers came to recognize his carriage, the way he moved through the scaffolding with a particular intensity. He was building something larger than a hotel. He was building proof that he was not simply a man who had inherited wealth. He was a creator, an innovator, a man who could leave a mark on the world that would outlast him. But creation demands sacrifice. And Astor was about to discover just how much this dream would cost. The question was not whether he could build the St. Regis. The question was what building it would take from him. Chapter 2. Building the Impossible. To build the St. Regis, Astor was not just crafting a building, but an entire world. The foundation stone was laid in August of 1904. Workers excavated 40 feet down into Manhattan bedrock. They poured 3,000 cubic yards of concrete, creating a base strong enough to support 18 stories of limestone, brick, and marble. The site became a theater of constant motion. 120 laborers worked 6 days a week. Steam-powered cranes lifted steel beams into position. Horses hauled cartloads of material through streets that were themselves under constant reconstruction. Astor's specifications were ruthless. When the first batch of limestone arrived from Indiana, he rejected it. The color was wrong, too yellow, not the pale gray he had envisioned. New stone was quarried and shipped at considerable delay and expense. When the copper piping for the plumbing system arrived, inspectors found microscopic imperfections. Astor ordered it replaced. Every component had to be perfect, even the parts no guest would ever see. The building rose through 1905. Steel framework climbed toward the sky. Masons laid brick in perfect courses. Window frames were installed, each one custom-made to Astor's dimensions. The facade began to take shape, a vision of Beaux Arts elegance that somehow avoided the heavy pomposity of so many buildings of the era. It looked lighter than its mass, more graceful than its scale should have allowed. Inside, the real complexity was taking form. Miles of copper wire were threaded through walls for the electrical system. Each guest room would have multiple light fixtures, controlled by switches rather than pull chains. The telephone system required a central switchboard room staffed around the clock. Operators would need to memorize room numbers and guest names, connecting calls with speed and discretion. The plumbing system was an engineering marvel. Every floor had its own pressure system. Hot water was generated by coal-fired boilers in the basement, then pumped through insulated pipes to tanks on each floor. This meant hot water arrived at taps within seconds, not minutes. Cold water came from the city supply, but passed through filtration systems before reaching guest rooms. Astor had read about waterborne diseases. His hotel would eliminate that risk. The central vacuum system was perhaps the most ambitious innovation. A motor in the basement created constant suction. Pipes ran through every wall, ending in small outlets in each room and corridor. Maids connected rubber hoses to these outlets, and debris was pulled down through the walls to collection bins below. It was elegant, efficient, invisible. But these invisible systems came at a cost that went beyond money. Workers labored in dangerous conditions. 2 men fell from scaffolding during construction. One died instantly. The other lingered for 3 days before succumbing to his injuries. Astor paid compensation to the families, amounts that were generous by the standards of the time, but would not return fathers and husbands. The construction continued without pause. In the basement, mechanical rooms were designed to house the building's vital organs: boilers, generators, compressors, water tanks. These rooms were hot, loud, and dangerous. Men would work there in 12-hour shifts, monitoring gauges, shoveling coal, making repairs. The St. Regis would employ nearly 400 staff members. Most would never be seen by guests. They would move through service corridors and back stairways, maintaining the illusion of effortless luxury. The kitchen was designed to produce 1,000 meals per day. It occupied the entire basement beneath the dining room. 6 coal-burning ranges, 3 roasting ovens, a separate pastry kitchen with marble work surfaces kept cool by ice, a separate pantry for silver service, a washing room with sinks large enough to clean the largest serving platters. Everything was arranged for efficiency, allowing 50 kitchen staff to move without collision or confusion. Astor interviewed the head chef himself. He wanted someone who understood that the St. Regis menu would need to match its accommodations. The chef he hired had trained in Paris and worked at the Savoy in London. His salary was $5,000 per year, more than most doctors earned. But Astor understood that reputation would be built on every detail, including what appeared on plates. By late 1905, the building was nearly complete. Furniture was ordered from workshops in New York, Boston, and Europe. Beds were custom-made to Astor's specifications, larger than standard hotel beds, and fitted with the finest mattresses money could procure. Carpets were woven in Belgium, each one designed for its specific location. Draperies were sewn from silk imported from Lyon. The cost was escalating beyond initial projections. Astor had budgeted $2,500,000. The final cost would approach $3 million, and that was $1.2 billion today for a single building. But Astor never wavered. He had committed to creating perfection, and perfection could not be purchased on a budget. There were rumors in social circles, whispers that Astor was overextending himself, that the St. Regis was vanity rather than investment, that a man of his wealth should not be so personally involved in a commercial venture. But Astor ignored the gossip. He knew what he was building. In the spring of 1906, the interior was finished. Crystal chandeliers were hung in public rooms. Paintings were mounted in gilded frames. The entrance hall received its final touch. A massive floral arrangement changed daily. Staff were hired and trained. They learned to anticipate guest needs before those needs were voiced. They learned to move silently, speak softly, and maintain absolute discretion. The St. Regis was ready to open. after 2 years of construction, after $3 million of investment, after countless hours of Astor's personal attention and obsession. But was the world ready for what Astor had created? And more importantly, was Astor ready for what his creation would demand of him? The grand opening was set for September 4th, 1906. Everything was prepared. Everything except for the one thing Astor could not control, the future. Chapter 3. When the dream was real, the grand opening of the street. Regis was everything Astor dreamed it would be, and yet it was also the beginning of his downfall. September 4th, 1906 arrived with perfect autumn weather. Sunlight streamed through new windows onto marble floors that had never been walked upon. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above rooms that had never hosted guests. The St. Regis stood complete, waiting to fulfill its purpose. The opening was not announced with fanfare. There were no speeches or ribbon cuttings, and Astor had insisted on a quiet debut. The hotel simply opened its doors, and the elite of New York society arrived as if drawn by invisible magnetism. They came to see what John Jacob Astor IV had created. They came to judge whether $3 million had been wisely spent. The first guests were a mixture of industrialists, railroad magnates, banking families, and European aristocrats. They arrived in private carriages and early automobiles. Doormen in crimson livery greeted them. Bellhops carried luggage through the intimate entrance into the lobby. And there, the guests encountered something unprecedented. The reception was handled with the discretion of a private home rather than the efficiency of a hotel. Staff members greeted arriving guests by name, having memorized the reservation list. Rooms were ready instantly. No waiting, no paperwork at a public desk. Everything was handled with silent proficiency. The guests were escorted to rooms where their luggage had already arrived through service elevators they never saw. The rooms themselves were revelations. Each one was different, decorated individually rather than with generic hotel furnishings. The beds were larger than standard. The bathrooms featured porcelain fixtures and unlimited hot water. The electric lights could be controlled from multiple switches. The telephone connected to the switchboard with a single lift of the receiver. But it was the invisible systems that truly impressed. The air was fresh without being drafty. The temperature was comfortable without visible radiators. The silence was remarkable for a building in the heart of Manhattan. Astor's obsession with insulation and soundproofing had created rooms that felt removed from the city outside. The dining room opened that evening. 400 guests could be seated, but Astor had intentionally limited reservations to 200 for the first night. He wanted perfection, not capacity. The menu featured French cuisine prepared by his Parisian-trained chef, Dover sole, saddle of lamb, strawberries with cream. Each dish arrived at the precise temperature, presented with artistry. The wine cellar had been stocked with 10,000 bottles, including Bordeaux from 1870, Champagne from 1898, and Port from 1877. The sommelier Astor had hired could discuss the provenance of every bottle. Guests were not simply served wine. They were offered stories about vineyards and vintages. Word spread quickly through New York society. The St. Regis was not merely excellent, it was in a category beyond comparison. Within a week, every room was booked months in advance. Wealthy travelers changed their plans to include New York, specifically to stay at the St. Regis. European aristocrats wrote letters requesting suites for their American visits. The hotel had become overnight, that with staff, ensuring every detail met his with staff, ensuring every detail met his standards. He stood in the lobby and watched guests move through spaces he had designed. He dined in the restaurant and listened to conversations about his achievement. For a man who had inherited wealth and struggled to prove his own worth, the St. Regis was vindication. But vindication came with complications. The hotel was profitable from its first month of operation. Room rates were set at $5 per night for standard rooms, $15 for suites. That would be $150 to $450 today. Even at those prices, demand exceeded supply. The restaurant generated additional revenue. The bar became a gathering place for Manhattan's elite. But profit was not the same as return on investment. $3 million earning 10% annual returns elsewhere would generate $300,000 per year. The St. Regis, even running at full capacity with premium pricing, generated approximately $400,000 in annual gross revenue. After operating expenses, staff salaries, maintenance, and taxes, net profit was perhaps $100,000 per year. At that rate, Astor would need 30 years to recover his construction costs. And he was not building for profit. He was building for legacy. But legacies require time, and time was something Astor did not know he lacked. In the months following the opening, Astor's presence at the hotel became less frequent. His marriage to Ava was deteriorating beyond repair. They maintained appearances for society, but lived increasingly separate lives. Astor retreated to his laboratory and his inventions. He traveled to Europe. He spent time at his country estate, the Saint. Regis operated with remarkable efficiency, managed by staff he had trained, but it no longer required his daily attention. This was both success and loss. The hotel had become self-sufficient, proof that Astor's systems worked. But it also meant the hotel was no longer his alone. It belonged now to its guests and staff, to the city, and to history. Astor had created something larger than himself, and in doing so, had become less essential to it. By 1907, the Saint, Regis was established as the finest hotel in America, perhaps the finest in the world. It had achieved everything Astor had envisioned. The technology worked flawlessly. The service was impeccable. The reputation was unassailable. But Astor himself was changing. The man who had poured himself into architectural drawings and engineering specifications was becoming restless. The dream had been realized, and now he needed something else to occupy his mind. He began writing science fiction. He published a novel in 1908 called A Journey in Other Worlds, imagining space travel to Jupiter and Saturn. Critics dismissed it as amateurish, but it revealed something important. Astor's mind was already leaving Earth, already searching for the next impossible dream. The St. Regis continued to thrive. Guests came and went. Staff maintained the perfection Astor had demanded. The hotel became woven into the fabric of New York life. It was where presidents stayed, where business deals were negotiated, where marriages were celebrated and scandals whispered about. But for Astor, the St. Regis was already becoming past tense, a completed project, a finished chapter. He could not have known how prophetic that feeling would become. The dream was real. The achievement was complete. But achievement, once secured, offers little comfort. And Astor was about to learn that some dreams cost more than money. They cost everything. Chapter 4. The Price of Grandeur. As the St. Regis flourished, the cost of its creation began to reveal itself. The hotel's success masked a more complicated financial reality. Astor's fortune was vast, but it was not liquid. His wealth existed primarily in real estate holdings scattered across Manhattan. Buildings, land, long-term investments. The $3 million spent constructing the St. Regis had required selling assets and redirecting capital that had been generating steady returns. His financial advisors had counseled caution. They had suggested that $3 million was excessive for a single project, that a more modest hotel could achieve similar returns with less risk, that Astor's personal involvement was preventing him from attending to other business matters that required his attention. But Astor had dismissed their concerns. The St. Regis was not a business decision. It was a statement. Now, with the hotel operating successfully but generating modest returns relative to its cost, those advisors' warnings seemed prescient. Astor's overall wealth continued to grow, but not as quickly as it had before the St. Regis project. The opportunity cost of $3 million tied up in a single building was significant. That capital, deployed differently, could have generated substantially more income. But the financial cost was only one dimension of what the St. Regis had demanded. Astor's marriage to Ava finally collapsed completely in 1909. They divorced after 18 years of marriage. The separation was bitter and public. Ava received a settlement of $10 million, one of the largest divorce settlements in American history to that point. Astor also agreed to pay her an annual allowance of $100,000 and allowed her to remain in their mansion on Fifth Avenue. The divorce scandalized New York society. Its divorce was still considered shameful among the upper classes. Astor's reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, was damaged. Some social circles closed to him. Business relationships became strained. The man who had built the St. Regis to prove his worth now found that worth questioned in drawing rooms and clubs across the city. But Astor's response to social censure was characteristically audacious. In 1911, at age 47, he married 18-year-old Madeleine Talmadge Force. The age difference was shocking. She was younger than his son Vincent. The marriage caused even greater scandal than the divorce. Society matrons refused to receive Madeleine. Astor's own mother disapproved. The couple became social pariahs among the very people the St. Regis had been built to serve. The irony was sharp and painful. Astor had created the ultimate symbol of social acceptance in a hotel where the elite gathered and celebrated their status. But now he himself was excluded from many of those same social circles. The St. Regis continued to prosper without him, hosting guests who whispered about its creator's scandalous personal life. Madeleine became pregnant in late 1911. The couple decided to travel to Europe and Egypt, partly for leisure and partly to escape the social hostility they faced in New York. They would winter abroad, away from disapproving eyes. They would return in the spring when Madeleine was closer to her delivery date. The trip was meant to be an escape, a chance to build their new life away from judgment. They traveled first class, staying in the finest hotels, dining at the best restaurants. Astor's wealth could purchase comfort and service anywhere in the world. The St. Regis had proven that. Money, properly applied, could create perfect experiences. But money could not purchase safety, and money could not change fate. The financial cost of the St. Regis was measurable. $3 million in construction, $10 million in divorce settlement. the lost opportunity of capital that could have been deployed elsewhere. But there were other costs, harder to quantify. The time Astor had spent obsessing over architectural details was time not spent with his children. The emotional energy poured into creating perfect hotel rooms was energy unavailable for his failing marriage. The Saint. Regis had demanded everything from Astor: his attention, his money, his time, his obsessive perfectionism, and he had given it willingly, eagerly. The hotel had consumed him in ways he had not anticipated when he first sketched its outline in his study. Now, sailing back across the Atlantic with his young, pregnant wife, Astor could look back at his creation with satisfaction. The St. Regis stood on Fifth Avenue, operating exactly as he had designed it. Guests praised its service. Competitors studied its innovations. The building had achieved everything he had intended. But achievement is not the same as fulfillment, and success is not the same as happiness. Astor had learned this truth over the past 5 years. The St. Regis was perfect, and that perfection had cost more than anyone looking at its elegant facade could imagine. The hotel had taken pieces of his life, his energy, his relationships, and transformed them into marble columns and electric lights and hot running water. The alchemy of creation always requires sacrifice. Astor had been willing to pay any price for his dream. He just hadn't understood how much more would be demanded of him. On April 10, 1912, John Jacob Astor IV and his wife Madeleine boarded a ship in Southampton, England. The ship was new, the largest ever built. It was making its maiden voyage to New York. The ship was considered unsinkable by its designers. It was called the Titanic. And the true cost of the St. Regis was about to be revealed. Not in dollars or social standing, but in something far more permanent. The price of grandeur was still being calculated, and the final bill was coming due. Chapter 5. Loss at Sea. Just years after its opening, Astor's life ended in the icy waters of the Atlantic, his legacy now adrift with him. The Titanic departed Southampton on Wednesday, April 10, 1912. It was the most luxurious ship ever built, stretching 882 feet long, displacing 46,000 tons. The first-class accommodations rivaled the finest hotels in the world. Perhaps they even rivaled the St. Regis. Astor and Madeleine occupied one of the most expensive suites, a parlor and bedroom with private promenade deck. Astor was 47 years old. Madeleine was 19 and 5 months pregnant. They were returning home after 4 months abroad. The scandal of their marriage had not diminished in their absence, but they hoped time would eventually soften society's judgment. Madeleine was nervous about the voyage. She had never been comfortable at sea, but Astor reassured her. The Titanic was modern, safe, equipped with the latest technology. What could go wrong? The ship stopped briefly in Cherbourg, France, then Queenstown, Ireland, collecting additional passengers. On the afternoon of April 11th, the Titanic departed Ireland and headed west across the North Atlantic. The route was well traveled. The weather was good. The ship made excellent speed, over 22 knots. Astor spent the voyage much as he had spent time at the St. Regis, observing, analyzing. He walked the ship's decks, noting engineering details. He questioned crew members about the ship's systems. He was particularly interested in the watertight compartments, a safety innovation that supposedly made the ship unsinkable even if the hull was breached. His inventor's mind appreciated elegant solutions to complex problems. Madeleine remained mostly in their suite. She was tired from pregnancy and still uncomfortable with the ship's constant motion. Astor doted on her, ordering meals delivered to their room, arranging for her comfort. Despite their age difference, despite the scandal, their marriage appeared genuine. They seemed happy together in a way Astor had never been with Ava. On Sunday evening, April 14th, the temperature dropped sharply. Astor and Madeleine dined in the first-class dining saloon. The meal was elaborate, 7 courses served over 2 hours. Oysters, soup, salmon, filet mignon, lamb, pudding, fruit. The dining room was warm and bright, insulated from the cold ocean air outside. After dinner, Astor and Madeleine retired to their suite. The ship was making excellent speed. They would arrive in New York on Wednesday morning, just a few more days. Then they would return to the St. Regis, at least temporarily, while preparing for the baby's arrival. At 11:40 p.m., 600 miles south of Newfoundland, in calm seas under clear skies, the Titanic struck an iceberg. The collision was almost gentle. Many passengers barely noticed. There was no violent crash, just a scraping sound along the starboard side, a slight shudder through the hull. Astor felt it immediately. His engineering sense told him something was wrong. The engines stopped. That was unusual. He dressed quickly and went to investigate. He found crew members speaking in urgent whispers. Water was entering the ship. The watertight compartments were being breached one after another. The unsinkable ship was sinking. He returned to the suite and woke Madeleine. He spoke calmly. They needed to dress warmly and go to the boat deck. It was likely just a precaution, but they should be prepared. Madeleine was frightened but trusted him. They put on life jackets over their heavy coats. On the boat deck, chaos was carefully restrained. Officers were loading lifeboats, women and children first. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, enough for 1,178 people. There were 2,224 people on board. The arithmetic was simple and terrible. There were not enough boats. Astor escorted Madeleine to a lifeboat. He asked an officer if he could accompany his wife, given her condition. The officer refused. Women and children only. Astor did not argue. He helped Madeleine into the boat. He looked at her one last time. He told her he would follow in another boat. They both knew he was lying. The boat was lowered at 1:30 a.m. Madeleine looked up at the deck, at the figure of her husband standing in the cold night air. The ship was listing now. The bow was submerging. But Astor stood calmly, watching her boat descend to the water 60 feet below. What did he think in those moments? Did he think about the St. Regis standing on Fifth Avenue? Did he think about the years spent perfecting invisible systems and architectural details? Did he think about his children from his first marriage, Vincent and Alice? Did he regret the divorce, the scandal, the choices that had brought him to this moment? Or did he simply accept what was happening with the same calm efficiency he brought to engineering problems? The situation was clear. The solution was obvious. There were not enough lifeboats. Therefore, some people would die. He would be one of them. The logic was irrefutable. After Madeleine's boat was lowered, Astor remained on deck. Other men stood with him: Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, John Thayer, all men of wealth and accomplishment, all facing the same mathematical certainty. There were no more boats. The ship was sinking. The water was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. A person could survive perhaps 15 minutes in water that cold. The Titanic's stern rose higher as the bow disappeared beneath the surface. At 2:17 a.m., the forward funnel collapsed, killing dozens of people struggling in the water. At 2:20 a.m., the ship's lights went out. The Titanic broke in half just aft of the third funnel. The stern rose nearly vertical before plunging into the ocean. 2,224 people were suddenly in the freezing North Atlantic. Most of them would be dead within half an hour. Astor's body was recovered on April 22nd by the cable ship Mackay Bennett. He was found floating in his life jacket, his body relatively intact. The recovery crew noted his identity from his initials sewn into his clothing and from the large amount of money in his pockets, $2,440 in cash. A gold pocket watch that had stopped at 2:20 a.m. His body was shipped to New York. The funeral was held at Trinity Church on May 4th, nearly a month after the sinking. Madeleine, now a widow at 19, attended despite being 7 months pregnant. She wore black. She did not speak to reporters. The scandal that had surrounded their marriage was forgotten in the shadow of tragedy. Vincent Astor, now 20 years old, became the head of the family. He inherited the bulk of his father's fortune, estimated at $87 million after estate taxes and settlements. Madeleine received a trust fund of $5 million to be paid only as long as she did not remarry. If she remarried, the money reverted to Vincent. It was a provision Astor had included in his will, written just weeks before boarding the Titanic. The St. Regis continued operating without interruption. Guests checked in and out. Meals were served, rooms were cleaned. The systems Astor had designed worked perfectly. His creation did not need him anymore. It had achieved independence through his obsessive attention to detail. The hotel was self-sufficient, perpetual, but perpetual is not the same as permanent, and independence is not the same as immunity. The St. Regis had lost its creator, and without him, the building would face challenges he had never anticipated. The man who had demanded perfection was gone. The man who had poured $3 million and years of obsession into every detail would never walk its corridors again. The St. Regis had cost Astor everything: his first marriage, his social standing, his time, his attention, his money, and ultimately his life. Not directly. The hotel did not cause the Titanic to sink, but the obsessive perfectionism that created the St. Regis was the same quality that drove Astor to board the most advanced ship ever built, entrusting in engineering and technology to conquer nature. Both the St. Regis and the Titanic were marvels of human achievement. Both represented the belief that wealth and ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. Both proved that human ambition has limits, and that some prices cannot be calculated until they have already been paid. Madeleine gave birth to a son on August 14th, 1912. She named him John Jacob Astor VI, after his father. The boy would never meet the man he was named for, never walk through the hotel his father built, never understand the obsession that drove its creation. The St. Regis stood on Fifth Avenue. Its lights still burned, its systems still functioned, its reputation remained intact. But the man who had dreamed it into existence was gone, and now the building would have to survive without him. Chapter 6. When the numbers stopped making sense. With Astor gone, the hotel's future was uncertain, and the numbers started to show it. Vincent Astor was 20 years old when his father died. He inherited $87 million, making him one of the wealthiest young men in the world. But wealth and maturity are different things. Vincent had expected years to prepare for this responsibility. Instead, he was thrust into managing a vast real estate empire while still mourning his father. The St. Regis was just one asset in a portfolio that included office buildings, residential properties, and land holdings across Manhattan. But it was unique among these holdings. It was not simply real estate. It was his father's obsession made manifest. Every detail bore the mark of John Jacob Astor IV's personal vision. Vincent understood this. It created pressure beyond mere financial management. The hotel had been profitable since opening. But profit is relative. The street. Regis generated approximately $120,000 in net profit annually by 1912. That represented a 4% return on the $3 million construction cost. By comparison, office buildings in Lower Manhattan were generating 8 to 10% returns. The St. Regis was underperforming as an investment. Vincent's financial advisors presented him with analysis and recommendations. The hotel could be sold. Several parties had expressed interest in offering between $3.5 and $4 million. That would recoup the construction cost and generate a profit. The capital could then be redeployed into higher returning assets. From a purely financial perspective, selling made sense. But Vincent hesitated. The St. Regis was not just an asset, it was his father's legacy. Selling it would feel like betraying that legacy. And Vincent, despite inheriting his father's fortune, had never fully earned his father's approval. The Saint. Regis offered a chance to honor Astor's memory, to maintain what he had created, to prove himself worthy of the inheritance. He decided to keep the hotel, but keeping it required more than sentiment. It required active management and ongoing investment. The building was only 6 years old, but wear was already appearing. Carpets needed replacement, furniture needed repair, mechanical systems required maintenance. The invisible perfection Astor had demanded did not maintain itself automatically. Vincent allocated funds for upkeep. He hired managers to oversee operations, but he lacked his father's obsessive attention to detail. He did not walk the corridors checking for imperfections. He did not interview staff personally. He did not taste every dish in the restaurant. The hotel continued operating at a high level, but the drive for absolute perfection began to fade. Operating costs were climbing. Coal prices increased steadily from 1912 through 1914. The street. Regis burned approximately 40 tons of coal per week, heating water and generating electricity. Rising fuel costs directly impacted profitability. Staff salaries also increased. Competition for skilled hotel workers drove wages higher. The economic pressures that Astor had been able to ignore through personal wealth now demanded Vincent's attention. Revenue was not keeping pace. Room rates remained at $5 per night for standard rooms, $15 for suites, and guests expected these rates. The St. Regis had established itself at a particular price point. Raising rates risked losing customers to competing hotels, but maintaining rates while costs increased meant shrinking profit margins. By 1914, net profit had declined to approximately $90,000 annually, still profitable, but trending in the wrong direction. Vincent's advisors again suggested selling. The hotel's reputation remained strong. A buyer could be found. But Vincent again refused. Then the world changed in ways no one had anticipated. In August 1914, war erupted in Europe. Britain, France, and Russia went to war with Germany and Austria-Hungary. The conflict was expected to be brief. It would last 4 years and kill millions. America remained neutral initially, but the war's economic impact was immediate and global. European tourism to New York essentially stopped. Wealthy British, French, and German families who had been regular guests at the St. Regis canceled their plans. The passenger ship traffic across the Atlantic diminished dramatically. The wealthy European clientele that had filled the hotel's suites disappeared almost overnight. Domestic guests continued visiting, but they could not fully compensate for the loss of international business. Occupancy rates declined from 95% to 75%. Revenue dropped accordingly. The hotel's net profit in 1915 was $60,000. In 1916, it was $40,000. The decline was accelerating. The war affected more than just tourism. Many of the St. Regis staff were immigrants from European countries now at war with each other. French chefs worked alongside German porters. British waiters served Austrian guests. The political tensions that convulsed Europe echoed faintly in the hotel's corridors, and staff members who had worked together for years suddenly viewed each other with suspicion. Vincent was only 24 years old and managing challenges his father had never faced. The St. Regis had been designed for a world of stable prosperity and international leisure travel. That world was disappearing. A new world was emerging, shaped by war and nationalism and economic uncertainty. The hotel's 19th century elegance seemed increasingly out of place in the 20th century's harsher reality. In April 1917, America entered the war. The government requisitioned resources for the war effort. Coal supplies became restricted. The St. Regis had to reduce heating and hot water availability. Guests complained. Food supplies also became limited. The elaborate menus that had defined the hotel's dining experience had to be simplified. Meat was rationed. Sugar was scarce. The chef who had been hired to create French masterpieces now struggled to source basic ingredients. Staff members enlisted in the military. Experienced workers left for higher-paying jobs in war industries. The hotel's service level declined not through intention, but through necessity. New staff had to be hired and trained quickly. They lacked the polish and discretion of the original employees. Mistakes happened. Guests noticed. The numbers continued their downward trend. In 1917, the St. Regis lost money for the first time since opening. The loss was small, just $15,000, but the psychological impact was enormous. Astor's creation, which had seemed invincible, was now bleeding money. The invisible systems he had designed so carefully were being starved of the resources they needed to function properly. Vincent faced a choice. He could invest additional capital to maintain the hotel's standards. He could reduce standards to match available resources, or he could finally sell the property and redeploy the capital elsewhere. Each option had implications beyond finance. Each option felt like a judgment on his father's legacy. He chose to maintain the hotel, even at a loss. He allocated funds from other parts of the estate to cover the St. Regis's operating deficit. He justified this by arguing the hotel's brand value exceeded its immediate financial returns. But the truth was more emotional. He could not bring himself to abandon his father's dream. Madeline Astor remarried in 1916. She married William Dick, a childhood friend. As stipulated in John Jacob Astor IV's will, her trust fund reverted to Vincent. She gave up $5 million for love. It was a choice her late husband might have understood. He too had sacrificed financial logic for emotional need. Madeline's departure from the Astor family was quiet. She moved out of the mansion Astor had provided for her. She stopped visiting the St. Regis. She built a new life separate from the legacy that had briefly been hers. Her son, John Jacob Astor VI, remained part of Vincent's family, but Madeline herself faded from the story. The war ended in November 1918. The armistice brought relief and celebration, but it did not bring a return to the world that had existed before. The Gilded Age was over. The age of innocence was finished. The world that had created and sustained hotels like the St. Regis had been destroyed in the trenches of France and the battlefields of Europe. The St. Regis survived the war years. But survival is not the same as success. The hotel's numbers no longer made sense in the way they had when Astor was alive. The financial logic that had always been questionable was now completely absent. The building operated at break-even, or loss. It consumed capital rather than generating it. But Vincent would not let it go. He could not. The St. Regis was not a business decision anymore. It had become something else. A memorial, a monument, a promise to a dead father. And promises, once made, are difficult to break, even when the numbers stop making sense, even when logic demands surrender. Some things are kept not because they should be, but because abandoning them would mean abandoning something more important than profit. Vincent kept the St. Regis, but keeping it would require more than money. It would require accepting that his father's vision could not be sustained unchanged in a changed world. The question was whether Vincent had the courage to let his father's creation evolve, or whether he would try to preserve it exactly as it had been, like a museum exhibit rather than a living business. The answer to that question would determine whether the St. Regis survived the next decade, or whether it would join the Gilded Age in history's graveyard. Chapter 7. The Weight of Grief. For Astor's widow, the St. Regis wasn't just a hotel, it was a constant reminder of what had been lost. Madeline Astor Dick sat in her drawing room in 1923, 11 years after the Titanic sank. She was 30 years old. She had been married twice, widowed once, divorced once. She had 3 children from 2 husbands. She had inherited and then lost a $5 million trust fund. Her life, which should have been simple and privileged, had become complicated in ways she had never anticipated. She rarely thought about the St. Regis anymore. It belonged to Vincent now, part of the estate she had relinquished when she remarried. But occasionally, walking past its facade on Fifth Avenue, she would remember staying there briefly after returning from Europe, pregnant and grieving, waiting for her son to be born. Those memories were painful. She preferred to avoid them, but grief does not respect preference. It arrives uninvited and lingers long after it should have departed. Madeline had been 19 years old when she married John Jacob Astor IV. She had been from a good family, not wealthy, but respectable. Her marriage to Astor had been genuine on her part, whatever society believed. She had not married him for his money. She had married him because he paid attention to her, because he treated her as intelligent and interesting rather than decorative. Because his obsessive intensity, which frightened some people, fascinated her. The 5 months of their marriage had been turbulent. The social ostracism had hurt more than she admitted. But Astor had been kind to her, patient, protective. He had taken her to Europe to escape the judgment. He had promised her that time would soften people's opinions, that their child would be born into a world that had accepted their union. Then came the Titanic, the collision, the lifeboats. The last time she saw him, standing on the deck as her boat was lowered to the water, she had known even then that he was not getting off the ship. The look in his eyes had told her. He was saying goodbye. She had not wanted to believe it, but she had known. The weeks after the sinking had been a blur. The rescue ship Carpathia bringing survivors to New York. The funeral, the pregnancy continuing through her grief, the birth of her son 3 months after his father's death. She had named the baby after Astor, hoping to preserve something of the man she had lost. But a name is not a person. A son is not a husband. The baby could not fill the void Astor's death had created. The trust fund had provided financial security, but also constraint. $5 million paid as long as she remained unmarried. It was generous and insulting simultaneously. And Astor had loved her enough to provide for her, but not enough to trust her to remain faithful to his memory without financial incentive. She had met William Dick in 1915. He was younger than Astor had been, closer to her own age, uncomplicated. They had known each other as children. He offered a different kind of life, simple, normal, free from the weight of legacy and expectation. She had hesitated for months. The trust fund was substantial. To raise her children without being. To raise her children without being whispered about. To build a life that was hers rather than a continuation of someone else's vision. She married Dick in 1916. She gave up the $5 million without regret. The marriage had lasted 5 years. Dick had turned out to be less stable than she had hoped. He drank. He gambled. He resented living in the shadow of her first husband. Their arguments became frequent. Their silences became longer. They divorced in 1921. She was 28 years old, twice married, twice finished with marriage. Now, sitting in her drawing room in 1923, she thought about the St. Regis and what it represented. Astor had built it as proof of his worth, as evidence that he was more than just a man who had inherited wealth. But the hotel had demanded everything from him: his time, his attention, his obsessive focus. Things that could have been given to her. Things that might have saved their marriage from the social pressures that threatened it. She did not blame the hotel for Astor's death. The Titanic had killed him, not the St. Regis. But she wondered whether his obsession with creating perfect systems and invisible machinery had blinded him to other kinds of risk, whether his confidence in engineering and technology had made him complacent about human vulnerability. The St. Regis had survived him. It stood on Fifth Avenue, operating much as it always had. Guests still arrived and departed. Meals were still served. The invisible systems still functioned. Astor's creation had achieved the independence he had designed into it. But that independence meant the building did not need him. It had moved on without him. And perhaps that was the greatest irony. He had built something that did not require his continued presence. He had made himself unnecessary through his own perfectionism. Madeline's son, John Jacob Astor VI, was 11 years old now. He barely remembered his father. How could he? He had been born 4 months after the Titanic sank. The boy carried his father's name and a portion of his fortune, held in trust until he turned 21. But he did not carry his father's obsessions. He was interested in sports and friends and school, normal things, uncomplicated things. Madeline was glad for that. She did not want her son to inherit his father's drive for perfection. That drive had built the St. Regis, but it had also cost Astor his first marriage, his social standing, and ultimately his life. Perfection is a cruel master. It demands everything and offers nothing in return except the satisfaction of achievement. And achievement, Madeleine had learned, is cold comfort compared to the warmth of simple human connection. Vincent sometimes invited her to events at the hotel, dinners, receptions. He was trying to maintain family connections despite the complicated history. But Madeleine always declined. She could not walk through those corridors without remembering, without feeling the weight of what had been lost. Grief had changed shape over 11 years. It was no longer the sharp, overwhelming pain of those first months. It had become something quieter, a persistent sadness that colored everything. A sense that her life had reached its peak at 19, and everything since had been decline. She knew that was not true. She had her children. She had her independence. She had escaped the prison of the Astor name and expectations. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. The St. Regis represented all of it: the brief happiness, the tragedy, the complicated aftermath. It was a building, just stone and steel and glass. But buildings can carry emotional weight far beyond their physical mass. They can become symbols of everything they were never designed to represent. Astor had built the St. Regis to prove he was more than his inheritance. Madeleine now avoided it for the same reason. It reminded her that she had been more than just Astor's young wife. She had been a person with her own desires and fears. And those desires and fears had been overwhelmed by tragedy before she had fully understood them. She would live another 70 years. She would marry once more. She would outlive all her husbands and most of her children. She would see the world change in ways Astor could never have imagined. 2 world wars, economic depression, and prosperity. The end of the society she had briefly been part of. But she would never return to the St. Regis. Some griefs are too heavy to carry into the places where they were created. Some memories are too painful to revisit. The hotel stood as monument to Astor's vision, but for Madeleine, it stood as monument to loss, to a life interrupted, to dreams that died in cold water on a dark April night. The weight of grief does not diminish over time. It simply becomes more familiar, more bearable, but never lighter. And some places remain forever colored by that weight, forever associated with what can never be recovered. The St. Regis was such a place for Madeleine, and she would spend the rest of her long life keeping her distance from it, honoring her lost husband by refusing to walk through his most perfect creation. Because perfection, once achieved, becomes its own kind of prison. And she had already served enough time in prisons not of her making. Chapter 8. The World Moves On. As the Gilded Age came to a close, the world that had once embraced Astor's opulence began to shift beneath his family. The 1920s arrived with jazz and illegal liquor and a frenetic energy that rejected the formality of previous decades. The war was over. The soldiers had returned. America was wealthy and young and determined to enjoy itself. But this new prosperity looked different from the Gilded Age wealth that had built the St. Regis. The old fortunes were still large, but no longer dominant. New money was rising. Movie studios in Hollywood, automobile factories in Detroit, oil fields in Texas, These industries created millionaires overnight, self-made men who had no patience for the elaborate social rituals of the previous generation. They wanted luxury, but not stuffiness, glamour, but not formality. The St. Regis struggled to adapt to this new clientele. The hotel had been designed for European aristocrats and American robber barons, for people who understood the subtle signals of wealth and status. But the new rich did not care about subtle signals. They wanted obvious displays. They wanted excitement. They wanted to feel modern, not historical. Vincent Astor recognized the challenge. The hotel was only 15 years old, but already felt dated. The Beaux Arts elegance that had seemed timeless in 1906 now appeared old-fashioned. The invisible technological innovations that had impressed guests were no longer novel. Other hotels had copied the St. Regis's systems. Hot running water and telephones in every room were now standard. The competitive advantage Astor had purchased with $3 million had evaporated. The hotel needed to evolve or face obsolescence. But evolution meant changing what Astor had created. It meant admitting that his vision, perfect for its moment, was not eternal. Vincent found this admission difficult. Changing the St. Regis felt like betraying his father, but maintaining it unchanged felt like preserving a museum rather than operating a business. The Prohibition era complicated matters further. The 18th Amendment had banned the manufacture and sale of alcohol in 1920. The St. Regis's bar, which had been a gathering place for Manhattan's elite, had to close. The wine cellar Astor had stocked with 10,000 bottles was emptied. The bottles were supposedly destroyed, though rumors persisted that Vincent had hidden the best vintages in a private location. Guests who wanted to drink now went to speakeasies, illegal bars that served bootleg liquor in basement rooms and back alleys. These establishments had energy and danger that the St. Regis could not match. The hotel felt safe and predictable, admirable qualities in many contexts, but deeply unfashionable in the 1920s. Revenue declined again. Occupancy rates dropped to 60%. The hotel was bleeding money, losing approximately $50,000 annually by 1923. Vincent covered these losses from other income sources, but his advisors were increasingly insistent. The St. Regis was a financial drain. It needed to be either fixed or sold. Vincent tried various strategies. He reduced room rates, hoping to attract more guests. But lower rates meant lower revenue, even when occupancy increased. He cut staff, reducing the hotel's operating costs. But reduced staff meant reduced service quality. Guests noticed and complained. The St. Regis's reputation, built on impeccable service, began to suffer. The restaurant, once famous for its French cuisine, was simplified. The elaborate menus were replaced with shorter, cheaper offerings. The Parisian-trained chef resigned in protest. His replacement was competent, but unexceptional. Food critics who had praised the St. Regis now wrote lukewarm reviews. The dining room, which had been fully booked every evening, began to have empty tables. The invisible systems Astor had designed began showing their age. The central vacuum system broke down frequently. Repairs were expensive. The telephone switchboard, state-of-the-art in 1906, was now outdated. Guests complained about slow connections and dropped calls. The electrical system needed upgrading. The plumbing required constant maintenance. Buildings age faster than people realize, especially buildings with complex mechanical systems. Vincent was now 31 years old. He had spent 11 years managing the St. Regis, and it had consumed an enormous amount of his time and energy. He had other business interests that deserved attention: real estate developments, stock investments, philanthropic ventures. But the hotel demanded constant oversight. It was like caring for an elderly relative who required increasing levels of support while offering diminishing returns of satisfaction. The world had moved on from the values that created the St. Regis. The careful distinctions of social class that Astor had navigated now seemed quaint. The belief that wealth carried responsibility and required discretion had been replaced by a more vulgar celebration of money itself. The speakeasy culture valued authenticity over refinement, jazz over symphonies, freedom over formality. The St. Regis represented everything the 20s rejected. It was a monument to a vanished world, beautiful, well-crafted, increasingly irrelevant. Tourists walked past it on Fifth Avenue and admired its facade. But they stayed at newer hotels with livelier atmospheres. The St. Regis was becoming a landmark rather than a destination, respected rather than desired. In 1925, Vincent finally admitted defeat. Not complete defeat. He would not sell the hotel, but he would lease its operations to a professional hotel management company. He would remain the owner, but would no longer be responsible for daily decisions. The company would pay him a fixed annual rent and would absorb any operating losses. The arrangement was financially sensible, but emotionally complicated. Vincent was admitting he could not maintain his father's creation to his father's standards. He was acknowledging that the St. Regis needed professional management rather than family stewardship. He was choosing financial stability over personal obligation. The management company took control in January 1926. Guest rooms were updated with new furniture and decor. The lobby was redecorated in a lighter, more contemporary style. Guest rooms were updated with new furniture and fixtures. The restaurant menu was expanded to include American dishes alongside French classics. These changes improved the hotel's financial performance. Occupancy rates increased, revenue grew. By 1927, the St. Regis was profitable again for the first time in years. The management company proved that the hotel could succeed in the changed world. It just could not succeed while trying to preserve everything Astor had created. But success through change is not the same as vindication. Vincent visited the hotel occasionally and found it subtly wrong, still elegant, still well run, but somehow no longer his father's creation. The changes were individually small, but cumulatively transformative. The St. Regis was evolving into something new, something adapted to its environment, something survivable. Darwin's principle applied to buildings as surely as to animals: adapt or die. The St. Regis was adapting, but adaptation meant losing the purity of original vision. It meant accepting that perfection, even when achieved, cannot be sustained indefinitely in a changing world. Astor had built the St. Regis to be eternal, to embody timeless values of luxury and refinement. But nothing is eternal, not buildings, not fortunes, not social systems, not even memories. The world moves on, and those who cannot move with it are left behind, beautiful and obsolete, admired but not emulated. The St. Regis survived the 1920s, but it survived by becoming something other than what Astor had intended. It survived by accepting that the world he had built it for no longer existed. And that was perhaps the greatest irony of all. The man who had tried to create perfection had actually created something more valuable. He would never know it. And that made the "would never know it" and that made the survival bittersweet rather than triumphant. Chapter 9: The Cracks That Never Healed. The St. Regis was a masterpiece, but masterpieces are fragile. Only time would reveal its true cost. By 1929, the St. Regis had stabilized under professional management. It was profitable, well-regarded, competitive. But it would never again be what it had been in those first years after opening, when it represented the absolute pinnacle of luxury and innovation. That moment had passed. The hotel had become successful rather than exceptional, admirable rather than revolutionary. Then came October. The stock market crash of 1929 destroyed wealth on an unimaginable scale. Billions of dollars evaporated in days. Fortunes built over generations disappeared in hours. The economic devastation rippled outward from Wall Street to every corner of American life. The prosperous 20s ended abruptly. The Great Depression began. The St. Regis, like every luxury hotel in America, faced catastrophic decline. The wealthy guests who had filled its rooms suddenly had less wealth, or no wealth at all. Corporate executives who had stayed there monthly now avoided any unnecessary expense. Foreign tourists stopped coming entirely. Occupancy rates plummeted from 75% to 30% in a matter of months. The management company that had leased the hotel found itself unable to pay the rent to Vincent. In 1930, they defaulted on their contract. They returned operational control to Vincent and wished him luck. Professional hotel managers could not make the St. Regis profitable in a depression. What chance did he have? Vincent was 38 years old. He had thought he was done managing the hotel. Now he was responsible for it again during the worst economic crisis in American history. The timing could not have been worse. His own fortune had been diminished by the crash. While he remained wealthy by any standard, he was no longer wealthy enough to subsidize a money-losing hotel indefinitely. The St. Regis lost $300,000 in 1930. That was equivalent to $5 million today. And the losses accelerated in 1931. The hotel was becoming a financial catastrophe. Vincent faced a choice he had avoided for nearly 20 years. He could keep subsidizing the hotel until his own fortune was depleted, or he could finally sell. The problem was finding a buyer. Who wanted to purchase a luxury hotel during a depression? The real estate market had collapsed. There were no eager investors looking to acquire expensive properties. The St. Regis was beautiful, but functionally worthless in the economic context of 1931. Vincent considered simply closing the hotel, locking the doors and mothballing the building until the economy recovered. But closing meant laying off 300 employees. It meant admitting complete defeat. It meant accepting that his father's greatest creation could not survive the real world's harsh economics. He kept the hotel open. He reduced rates dramatically. And rooms that had cost $15 per night now cost $5. Even at those prices, occupancy remained below 40%. The restaurant operated at a loss. The bar remained closed due to prohibition. Every department hemorrhaged money. The building itself began to deteriorate. Maintenance was deferred. Carpets wore thin. Paint faded. The invisible systems Astor had designed so carefully began failing. The central vacuum system broke down and was not repaired. The telephone switchboard malfunctioned regularly. The plumbing developed leaks. The electrical system became unreliable. These were not dramatic failures. They were slow decay. The kind of decline that happens when a building is not maintained with the attention it requires. The St. Regis was aging, and age is unkind to buildings that depend on complex mechanical systems. The staff who remained were demoralized. Many had worked at the hotel since it opened in 1906, and they had taken pride in maintaining the standards Astor demanded. Now they were asked to accept lower wages, longer hours, and the knowledge that their work no longer met those standards. They stayed because jobs were scarce during the Depression, not because the St. Regis was still special. By 1933, Vincent was desperate. The hotel was losing $200,000 annually. He had subsidized those losses for 3 years. His own fortune was substantial, but not infinite. He needed to either fix the hotel or be rid of it. Prohibition ended in 1933. The 21st Amendment repealed the ban on alcohol. The St. Regis could reopen its bar. This provided some relief. Alcohol sales generated profit, even when room occupancy remained low. The bar became, briefly, more important than the hotel itself. Guests who could not afford rooms came to drink in surroundings that reminded them of better times. Yeah, but one profitable bar could not support a 300-room hotel. The fundamental economics remained impossible. The St. Regis had been built for a world of stable prosperity. It could not adapt to Depression conditions. Its costs were too high. Its expectations were too refined. It was a luxury product in a market that could no longer afford luxury. Vincent finally found a buyer in 1935. Vincent Astor Hotels, a corporation he formed specifically for this purpose. It could purchase the St. Regis from him personally. This was essentially an accounting maneuver. He was selling the hotel to himself. But it separated the property from his personal finances. If the hotel failed completely, it would not drag down his entire estate. The price was $2.5 million, less than the construction cost, less than the hotel was worth on paper, but more than anyone else would pay. Vincent took a loss on the sale, but the loss was contained, manageable. The bleeding was finally stopped. The 1930s were cruel years for the St. Regis. The hotel that Astor had built to be the finest in the world became just another struggling business. Its reputation remained intact. People still admired it. But admiration does not pay bills. The St. Regis needed more than respect. It needed guests who could afford to stay there. And such guests were increasingly rare. The hotel survived the Depression the way many businesses survived. Was survival, but it was survival at enormous cost. The cost was not measured in dollars alone. The cost was measured in the distance between what the St. Regis had been designed to be and what it had become. The cost was measured in the gap between Astor's vision and the building's reality. The cost was measured in deferred maintenance and declining standards and staff who no longer believed they worked somewhere exceptional. The cracks that appeared during the Depression never fully healed. Even when the economy recovered, even when prosperity returned, the St. Regis had learned a lesson during those years. It had learned that perfection is temporary, that excellence is expensive, that survival sometimes requires compromise. These lessons were necessary. It had been transformed from monument into a hotel. It had been forced to accept its own limitations. It had been transformed from monument into merely building. Masterpieces are fragile. They exist in specific contexts. When those contexts change, masterpieces either adapt or shatter. The St. Regis adapted, but adaptation is not the same as preservation. And what survives is not always recognizable as what was originally created. Astor's ghost, if such things existed, must have watched these years with complicated emotions. Pride that his building survived, sorrow at what survival required, understanding that he had built something both more and less than he intended, more durable, less pure, more human, less perfect. The true cost of the St. Regis was becoming clear. Not the $3 million Astor spent building it. We create must survive in a world we cannot control. And sometimes survival is the most we can hope for, even when survival looks nothing like success. Chapter 10. The last chapters. The St. Regis, for all its grandeur, still bears the scars of its creation. The Second World War transformed the St. Regis yet again. The hotel that had struggled through the Depression found new purpose during wartime. Military officers needed accommodations in New York. Government officials required meeting spaces. The hotel became, briefly, essential rather than merely elegant. Occupancy rates climbed to 90%. Revenue increased dramatically. The St. Regis was profitable for the first time in over a decade. But this was wartime profit, temporary and contingent. When the war ended, and the military guests would leave, the question was whether civilian guests would return. Vincent Astor was 53 years old in 1945 when the war ended. He had managed the St. Regis in various capacities for 33 years, longer than his father had lived after building it. The hotel had consumed more of Vincent's life than it had consumed of Astor's, and Vincent had far less to show for it. He had preserved the building. But preservation is not creation. Maintenance is not vision. He was tired. The decades of subsidizing losses, managing staff, overseeing renovations, dealing with economic crises had exhausted him. The St. Regis was still standing, still operating, still bearing the Astor name. But what had that cost him? What else could he have done with those years and that energy? In 1946, he sold the hotel, not to himself this time, to an actual buyer. The Astor Hotels Corporation purchased the street, Regis, for $4 million. The sale was final. After 40 years of Astor family ownership, the hotel passed into other hands. The buyer was not sentimental about the building's history. They saw a valuable property in a prime location. The Astor name would be maintained because it had brand value. But the connection to John Jacob Astor IV would fade. He would become a footnote in the hotel's story rather than its defining figure. Vincent felt relief more than regret. The burden was lifted. He was free from the obligation that had shadowed him since his father's death. He could finally focus on other interests, philanthropy, politics, his personal life. The St. Regis would continue without him, just as it had continued without his father. The hotel underwent extensive renovations in the late 1940s. The new owners invested millions updating mechanical systems. The central vacuum system was finally removed entirely, replaced by conventional cleaning equipment. The original telephone switchboard was replaced with modern technology. The electrical system was completely rewired. The plumbing was updated. These renovations erased much of what made the building unique. The invisible innovations Astor had been so proud of were demolished and replaced with conventional systems. The hotel became more reliable but less special, more profitable but less visionary, more adapted to reality but less connected to its creator's dream. The 1950s and 60s brought further changes. The Beaux Arts interior was modernized. The ornate moldings were simplified. The heavy draperies were replaced with lighter fabrics. The hotel was adapting to mid-century aesthetics. The result was commercially successful, but historically tragic. Each renovation removed another piece of Astor's original vision. Vincent Astor died in 1959 at age 67. His obituaries mentioned the St. Regis briefly. They focused more on his philanthropy and his role in Franklin Roosevelt's administration. The hotel was just one part of his life, not even the most important part. He had spent decades managing it, but history would remember him for other things. Madeline Astor Force, Dick Fiermonte, died in 1940 at age 46. Her obituaries barely mentioned the St. Regis at all. She had been Astor's widow for 28 years. But that role had defined such a brief part of her life. She had built a separate existence, died a separate death. The tragedy that had made her famous had not been enough to sustain interest across decades. The St. Regis continued operating through the later 20th century. It changed ownership multiple times. Each owner made changes, added amenities, updated systems, responded to market demands. The hotel remained successful, but it bore less and less resemblance to what Astor had built in 1906. By the 1990s, nothing of the original mechanical systems remained. The building's bones were the same, the facade was preserved, but everything inside had been replaced, most of it multiple times. The St. Regis was like a person who had lived so long that every cell in their body had been replaced. Still the same person, technically, but also fundamentally different. The hotel's reputation survived all these changes. The St. Regis remained prestigious, expensive, exclusive, but its prestige was now based on brand rather than innovation, on history rather than technology, on what it represented rather than what it actually was. This was perhaps the ultimate irony. Astor had built the St. Regis to prove that engineering and systems could create perfect luxury, that invisible technology could support visible elegance. That innovation mattered more than tradition. But the hotel survived by abandoning innovation and embracing tradition, by becoming historical rather than cutting edge, by celebrating what Astor had built rather than continuing what he had started. The scars of creation remained visible to those who looked closely. The compromises made during the Depression had permanently altered the building's trajectory. The adaptations made during and after the war had transformed its character. The renovations of later decades had erased most of the original details. The St. Regis survived, but survival had required it to become something its creator would barely recognize. Buildings age differently than people. They can be renovated, updated, transformed. They can outlive their original purpose and find new purposes, but they cannot escape their history. The St. Regis would always be the hotel John Jacob Astor IV built. That fact would appear in every description, every article, every promotional material. But what that fact meant had changed completely. The last chapters of family ownership had been written decades ago. The last chapters of the building's connection to its creator had been written even earlier. What remained was just a hotel, successful, respected, historic, but no longer driven by vision, no longer animated by obsession, no longer demanding perfection. The St. Regis had become what most buildings eventually become: a survivor, a testament to adaptability rather than achievement. A reminder that what we create outlasts us, but rarely in the form we intended. And that is both the reward and the punishment of ambition. We build things that survive us, but we do not control what they become after we are gone. Chapter 11. The Echo of the Past. Today, the St. Regis stands not just as a hotel, but as a reminder of what was lost and what was never fully realized. Walk past the Saint Regis today, and you will see a building that looks much as it did when it opened in 1906. The limestone facade is intact. The entrance remains intimate and elegant. The proportions are still graceful. From the outside, little has changed in over a century. The building has been preserved carefully, protected by landmark status, maintained by owners who understand its historical value. But step inside and the distance between then and now becomes apparent. The lobby, while beautiful, it bears little resemblance to the original. Multiple renovations have updated it repeatedly. The Caen stone and marble remain, but the arrangements are different. The lighting is modern. The furniture is contemporary. The space feels like a luxury hotel, which it is. But it does not feel like a 19th century mansion, which Astor had intended. The guest rooms have been renovated completely. The custom beds Astor specified are long gone. The individual thermostats he insisted upon have been replaced many times over. The telephones that were such innovations now seem quaint. The bathrooms that once impressed guests with unlimited hot water now compete with bathrooms in every major hotel that offer the same amenity. The invisible systems Astor was so proud of have been replaced with conventional modern equivalents. The central vacuum system exists only in historical records. The original plumbing has been torn out and replaced. The electrical system has been rewired multiple times. The innovations that cost millions in 1906 are now worth nothing except as historical curiosities. But the hotel thrives. Room rates now start at $700 per night. Suites can cost several thousand. The restaurant is highly regarded. The bar is fashionable. The service is excellent. The St. Regis remains one of the premier luxury hotels in New York. Its success is undeniable. But its success is not Astor's success. It is the success of a building that is adapted to survive. The St. Regis has become a brand. There are now St. Regis hotels in dozens of cities worldwide: Dubai, Bali, Aspen, Singapore. Each one carries the name Astor made famous. Each one promises similar luxury and service. But none of them were built by an obsessive inventor pouring his personal fortune into architectural perfection. They are corporate investments, calculated, professional, profitable. This expansion has brought the street, a Regis name, to a global audience. Millions of people recognize the brand who have never visited the original building in New York. The hotel Astor built has become the prototype for an entire category of luxury accommodation. In this sense, his vision succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. He created not just a building, but a concept that continues to replicate itself. But this success feels hollow when measured against Astor's actual intentions. He did not want to create a brand, and he wanted to create perfection. He did not want his hotel replicated. He wanted it to be singular. The global expansion of the St. Regis name would likely have horrified him. Each new property dilutes the original. Each franchise makes the New York building less unique. Contemporary guests staying at the St. Regis know little of its history. They may know Astor's name. They may know he died on the Titanic. But they do not know about his obsessive attention to detail, his insistence on invisible perfection. his belief that engineering could conquer discomfort, his $3 million investment, his personal supervision of every aspect of construction. The hotel has become disconnected from its creator. It exists now in the eternal present of luxury hospitality. Guests care about thread count and concierge services, about restaurant reservations and spa treatments, about the experience they are having now, and not about the history of how that experience became possible. This is not criticism of the guests. Why should they care about history? They are paying for comfort and service, not for education. The hotel provides what they want. That is success by any reasonable measure. But it is success that has drifted far from its origin. Tour guides sometimes bring groups past the St. Regis. They point out the building's architectural details. They mention Astor's name. They reference the Titanic. The hotel has become a stop on the historical circuit of Manhattan, alongside the Empire State Building and Grand Central Terminal. It is admired, photographed, explained, but mostly to people who will never step inside. The echo of the past grows fainter each year. The staff who worked under Astor's direct supervision are long dead. The guests who stayed during the hotel's opening years are gone. The social world that created and sustained the Gilded Age has vanished. Yet what remains is a beautiful building that houses a modern business that shares a name with a historical creation, but little else. Astor built the St. Regis to define an era, to prove that wealth and vision could create perfection, to leave a legacy that would outlast him. In a narrow sense, he succeeded. The building still stands. His name is still recognized. The hotel still operates. But in a broader sense, he failed. The era he tried to define is gone. The perfection he achieved was temporary. The legacy he left has been transformed beyond recognition. The St. Regis today reminds us that buildings outlive their creators, but not their contexts. That architecture can be preserved, but culture cannot. That names can be maintained even when meanings change. The echo of the past is present for those who listen carefully, but it competes with too many other sounds, and echoes, by their nature, grow fainter with distance. What was lost can be cataloged. The original mechanical systems, the hand-selected staff, the singular vision, the connection between creator and creation. What was never fully realized is harder to define. Did Astor achieve what he wanted? The building exists, but did it fulfill his vision? The hotel succeeded, but did that success match his intentions? These questions have no definitive answers. They depend on how we measure success, how we define vision, how we understand legacy. The street. Regis stands as evidence of achievement, but also as reminder of limitation. Astor could build perfection, but he could not make it permanent. He could create excellence, but he could not control its evolution. He could leave a legacy, but he could not determine what that legacy would become. The echo of the past tells us this. What we build survives. But survival is transformation. What endures is not what we created. It is what others made from what we created. And that is the nature of legacy. Not fixed, not controllable, not even fully knowable. The St. Regis echoes with Astor's ambition, but the echo is not Astor. It is just sound, traveling through time, diminishing with distance, interpreted differently by each person who hears it. Chapter 12. A legacy rewritten. What does it mean to leave a legacy behind when you never see its completion? John Jacob Astor IV died at 47 years old. He had approximately 25 years as an adult to make his mark on the world. He spent a significant portion of those years building the St. Regis. The hotel was his masterpiece, his proof of worth, his monument. But he saw only 6 years of its operation before drowning in the Atlantic. 6 years is not long enough to understand what you have created. The St. Regis opened in 1906. Astor died in 1912. In that brief window, the hotel was profitable, prestigious, successful by every measure he valued. He died believing he had achieved perfection. He died without knowing the hotel would struggle financially within years. Without knowing it would need to be sold. Without knowing his innovations would be replaced. Without knowing his vision would be compromised repeatedly. Is this mercy or tragedy? To die believing you succeeded, never learning you had not, or at least not in the way you intended. Legacy is what others say about us when we are gone. It is not what we accomplish. It is what survives of what we accomplished. And what survives is determined by forces beyond our control. Economics, culture, technology, time. These forces reshape our creations. They reinterpret our intentions. They assign meanings we never imagined. Astor intended the St. Regis to demonstrate that engineering and systems thinking could create perfect luxury, that invisible technology could support visible elegance, that wealth deployed intelligently could conquer human discomfort. These were the lessons he wanted to teach. These were the values he wanted to embody. But the actual lesson of the St. Regis is different. It teaches that perfection is temporary, that innovation becomes obsolete, that buildings must adapt or die, that survival requires compromise, that what we create becomes something else in the hands of those who inherit it. These lessons contradict everything Astor believed, but these lessons are what history extracted from his creation. This is the nature of legacy. We do not control it. We can only create the raw material from which others will construct interpretations. Astor created a building. Others created meanings about that building. The building remains relatively unchanged. The meanings have shifted constantly. Consider the multiple layers of meaning the St. Regis has accumulated. For Astor, it was proof of his individual worth separate from his inheritance. For Vincent, it was a burden and obligation. For Madeline, it was a reminder of loss. For Depression-era owners, it was a financial problem. For wartime guests, it was a convenient location. For contemporary visitors, it is a luxury brand. Each group projected different meanings onto the same building. Which interpretation is correct? All of them, none of them. The building does not have inherent meaning. Meaning is assigned by those who interact with it. And those assignments change as contexts change. The St. Regis is simultaneously a monument to ambition and a cautionary tale about obsession, a success story and a story of decline, a preserved landmark and a repeatedly renovated business. Legacy is not singular. It is multiple, contradictory, shifting. We imagine leaving behind a clear message. We actually leave behind raw material that will be interpreted in ways we cannot anticipate. And this should be humbling. It is both liberating and terrifying. We have less control than we imagine, but also less responsibility. What others make of what we create is on them, not us. Astor spent $3 million and years of obsessive effort building the St. Regis. Those resources could have been deployed differently. He could have built 3 modest hotels instead of one perfect one. He could have invested in other businesses. He could have spent time with his children. He could have worked on his marriage. He could have written more novels or developed more inventions. Every choice forecloses other choices. Astor chose the St. Regis. That choice shaped everything that followed: his divorce, his remarriage, his presence on the Titanic, his death in the Atlantic. The chain of causation is not deterministic, but it is present. The hotel did not kill him. But the personality that built the hotel was the same personality that boarded an unsinkable ship with confidence in engineering and technology. What can we learn from this? That ambition has costs? Obviously. That perfection is impossible? Clearly. That legacy is uncontrollable? Certainly. But these lessons are so obvious, they almost feel meaningless. Everyone knows ambition has costs. Everyone knows perfection is impossible. Everyone knows we cannot control how we are remembered. Perhaps the lesson is more subtle. Perhaps it is about the relationship between intention and outcome, between what we try to create and what actually gets created. Astor tried to build perfection. He actually built something more interesting, a building capable of adaptation, of survival through change, of meaning multiple things to multiple people across decades. He tried to freeze a moment of peak luxury and make it permanent. He actually created something that could evolve with changing times. His failure to achieve his intention was, paradoxically, what allowed his creation to succeed long term. If the St. Regis had remained exactly as he designed it, it would have become a museum, rigid, inflexible, unable to compete with newer hotels. It survived precisely because it could change. This suggests that our failures are sometimes more valuable than our successes, that what we do not achieve allows space for unexpected achievements. That rigid vision, fully realized, becomes brittle. That adaptability, even unintended adaptability, enables survival. The St. Regis stands today because it was not perfectly what Astor intended. The hotel succeeded because Astor's vision was not entirely achieved. This is uncomfortable truth. We imagine wanting our visions fully realized, but full realization might be fatal. Eyes were satisfied. The reputation were satisfied. The reputation was established. He died at the peak of success, before decline, before struggle, before compromise, before adaptation. In this sense, his death was perfectly timed. He never had to watch his creation bend to survive. Never had to accept that perfection cannot be maintained. It never had to choose between his vision and the building's survival. Is this mercy or tragedy? The question remains unanswered. Perhaps it is both simultaneously. What does it mean to leave a legacy behind when you never see its completion? It means you do not know what you have actually created. You know only what you intended to create. And the gap between intention and reality is often vast, sometimes disappointingly vast. Sometimes, as with the St. Regis, surprisingly beneficial. Legacy is completed by others, by those who inherit what we build, by those who adapt it to their needs, by those who assign it meanings we never imagined. This is not failure. This is the nature of creation. We begin things. Others continue them. Others transform them. Others decide what they mean. Astor began something that continues today, not as he intended, not in the form he designed, but continuing nonetheless. The St. Regis operates. The name persists. The building stands. That is legacy. Not perfect, not complete, not controllable, but real. And perhaps that is enough. To create something that survives, even transformed. To begin something that others can continue, even in unexpected directions. to leave raw material that future generations can shape into meanings that serve their needs, even if those meanings contradict our intentions. The St. Regis is John Jacob Astor IV's legacy. But it is not his alone. It belongs also to Vincent, who struggled to maintain it, to Madeleine, who refused to return to it, to the managers who adapted it, to the guests who inhabited it, to the city that surrounded it, to the century that transformed it. Legacy is collaborative. We start the story. Others write subsequent chapters. And the story they write is often more interesting than the one we intended, more complex, more contradictory, more human. That is what it means to leave a legacy behind when you never see its completion. It means accepting that completion is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to begin, to create, to build. What comes after is beyond your control. And maybe that is exactly how it should be. The St. Regis stands. Astor does not. But his ambition persists in transformed state. His obsession continues in evolved form. His dream survives, reimagined by each generation that encounters it. This is not the immortality he sought, but it may be the only kind of immortality available to anyone. We build, we die. What we built changes, but it continues. And continuation, even through transformation, is victory enough. Can a legacy survive when its creator is gone? The question that opened this story can now be answered. Yes, but not unchanged, not pure, not exactly as intended. Legacy survives through adaptation, through reinterpretation, through transformation. The St. Regis survived John Jacob Astor IV. It will survive longer than anyone who currently knows his name. It will stand for decades or centuries more, gradually drifting further from its origin, accumulating new meanings, serving new purposes. And somewhere in that future building, in some detail of proportion or some choice of material, Astor's original vision will persist, faint, transformed, but present. That is legacy, not perfect, not complete, but enduring. And for those brave enough to create, foolish enough to dream, obsessed enough to build, that endurance must be enough, because it is all we get, and it is more than most achieve. The St. Regis stands. The man who built it rests at the bottom of the Atlantic, but his dream, reimagined and transformed, continues. And that continuation is the only immortality available to mortals. Imperfect, incomplete, but real, and real is enough.